Welcome to FO Talks. I'm Peter Isackson, Fair Observer's Chief Strategy Officer. Today, I'm joined by Nicolas Davies, an independent journalist, researcher at Code Pink, and author of a book called Blood on Our Hands, The American Invasion and Destruction of Iraq, as well as, and I'll mention your book, Nicolas, that I reviewed for Fair Observer, The War in Ukraine, which you wrote with your colleague, Media Benjamin. Nicolas, you and Media have been focusing recently. I mean, there's a lot to focus on because obviously your vocation is to be concerned with war. But what I'd like to talk about to start things off is the 12-day war, which we've just experienced. Can you just give us some context on that? Tell us where we are, or how you see it, and then we'll go into some of the details.
Yes, well, I mean, this is really extraordinary in that the U.S. and Israel have been threatening Iran for at least 20 years, going back to when George Bush declared the axis of evil, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, as a sort of conjunction of terrorism, of weapons and weapons of mass destruction, which of course, Iran has neither. Was a victim of weapons of mass destruction in its war with Iraq, and when Iraq killed possibly as many as 100,000 Iranians with chemical weapons, which it was able to manufacture with a great deal of help from the United States and US allies in Europe. Iran has insisted throughout that it actually not only is not building nuclear weapons, but that it sees it as anathema to its identity as an Islamic state. It's almost sort of religiously forbidden from doing so, and yet the U.S. and Israel have maintained this endless sort of propaganda war against it, and again and again and again. The International Atomic Energy Agency and U.S. intelligence agencies have conducted, incredibly in-depth, expensive investigations, and have every time they have said anything at all conclusive, it has been to say that Iran does not have nuclear weapons, is not developing nuclear weapons. There is no evidence of that. But finally, after 20 odd years of this, Israel and the United States finally attacked Iran on the pretext that Iran is sort of on the verge of developing nuclear weapons.
Wasn't that pretext provided by the IAEA?
Well, to some extent, yes, it was. I mean, and so Medea and I wrote an article. It was published by the Progressive magazine under the title "The Plot Against Iran and How the IAEA Became Part of the U.S.-Israeli Plan for War on Iran." And and this was all incredibly coordinated. Since 2018, the Israelis supposedly have, a trove of Iranian documents, and reported to the IAEA that they had evidence of traces of highly enriched uranium in 3 different sites in Iran.
But Nicholas, can I interrupt you for a moment? Because I'm really bewildered by what you're just saying. You're saying that a nation that has nuclear weapons without being a part of the non-proliferation agreement, and which doesn't admit to have them, is providing information to this international organization that's meant to control the use of nuclear materials, and the IAEA takes that seriously without calling into question Israel's possession of nuclear arms. Does that make any sense?
No, this is all absolutely contradictory, and we, in the article, we actually went into, it's probably a bit complicated to do it in an interview, but the IAEA monitors nuclear technology and nuclear materials in every country that is a member of the IAEA, and that is 180 countries in the world. I mean, there are a few odd exceptions of countries that are not members of the IAEA. Obviously, the one that stands out is North Korea, which sort of quit the organization in the 1990s. But yes, and when you look through the IAEA website and its latest report, right up-to-date reports on its safeguards programs conducted in all these countries around the world, and most countries have what they consider a comprehensive safeguard agreement with the IAEA. There are a smaller number of countries that do not have a comprehensive safeguards agreement. But of all those 180 countries, the one that really stands out when you look at all their different safeguard agreements is, in fact, Israel. Because Israel effectively does not have a safeguards agreement, because the only agreement it has was one that it signed in the 1970s that pertained to a particular program. I think it was to do with the nuclear power plant at Dimona, where the US was assisting it in building a nuclear power plant. And so, but that was all completed, and in fact the underlying nuclear cooperation agreement between Israel and the United States ended in 1977. And yet, 4 days before that agreement ended, Israel and the IAEA signed an agreement to continue the IAEA's safeguards agreement pertaining to that work between the US and Israel, to continue that indefinitely. So technically, there is still a safeguards agreement in effect for Israel, but it only covers nuclear cooperation between the US and Israel that ended in 1977. And so in effect, Israel has managed, whereas North Korea sort of escaped the gaze of the IAEA by simply quitting the IAEA. Israel has escaped it, more deviously, with the cooperation of the United States, but effectively has no genuine. It has a sort of parody of an IAEA safeguards agreement, and that is all. And in that context, yes, it has gone ahead and developed nuclear weapons, and has never never allowed the IAEA to have any sort of view into that. So yes, in that context, it is absurd. It is absurd, and really, frankly, dangerous and disturbing that the IAEA under Rafael Grossi is cooperating with Israel over sort of manufactured fears about the possibility of Iran developing nuclear weapons, and that this has in fact finally led to war, that Israel has simply attacked Iran, sure, and then roped the United States into joining the attack. It's frankly, this is just a reflection of really the crisis of legitimacy affecting the whole international order at this time we're living in, and Israel, it has to be said, it conducted this attack on Iran in the context in which in the past year and a half it has attacked almost every one of its neighbors, with the exception of Egypt, I suppose. But it has attacked Syria and invaded and occupied more of Syria than it already occupied. It has invaded and occupied part of southern Lebanon, under the guise of fighting Hezbollah, which has actually sort of surrendered. And then there's Palestine, there's Gaza, there's the West Bank, and Israel still enjoying the support, full unconditional support of the United States, and being armed by the United States, is absolutely acting as a rogue, expansionist, genocidal actor in West Asia.
Going back to the IAEA, I've even heard some, and I don't know how much of this is rumor, so I'll ask you about what we actually do know, what concrete evidence exists of complicity between Grossi himself or the IAEA in general and Israel on the question of information about confidential information that was collected in the context of inspections, and that was communicated to Israel, including, and this is what I've heard, and I don't know if it can be confirmed, the identities and the addresses, the personal addresses of the various scientists that were targeted. Do we have any? These things have been stated and they seem credible, but is there any actual evidence of that?
Well, in the course of its inspections in Iran, the IAEA, did have quite a large team there, conducting this really, unprecedentedly intrusive inspection regime. And yes, obviously, since they were, this is all about nuclear technology and nuclear materials, the people they were meeting with were these senior Iranian scientists, and I'm sure their addresses. I don't know if if Iran tries to keep the addresses of these people secret, but they're probably.
But obviously, a lot of planning went into making surgical strikes on these people, which is quite extraordinary.
Yes, and the surgical strikes. I mean, there is still a lot of confusion and a lot of misdirection in terms of how Israel conducted all these strikes inside Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu said a number of times that they had destroyed Iran's ground-to-air defense systems, and it had a sort of open freeway for its planes to go in and attack Iran. That is certainly not the case. That is misdirection. The initial attacks by Iran were conducted in a number of ways. One of which involves
by Iran or by Israel? Sorry.
No, the initial attacks by Israel. I mean, Iran, It was about 24 hours. Iran was surprised, and it took about 24 hours before Iran really was able to respond, at which point it did respond militarily and quite effectively against Israel. But the ways in which Israel initially attacked Iran involved sabotage on the ground. Israel has a long history of working with the MEK, which is the essentially, at times it has been classified as a terrorist group by the United States and other Western countries, but it's the Mujahideen Khalq, and it's a sort of combination of a religious cult and a terrorist group and a sort of opposition group to the regime in Iran. During the U.S. occupation of Iraq, it was provided with a base in Iraq. I'm not sure exactly where it's based now. But there have been, over the years, extensive collaboration and complicity between the Israeli Mossad and the MEK. And so, yes, I mean, at least one of these nuclear scientists in Iran was killed by a car bomb attached to his car. And there were other attacks like that. And otherwise, the Israeli planes only made very limited entry into Iranian airspace. For the most part, they launched drones, and of course the Mossad and MEK people on the ground launched drones too, and they also fired some missiles from long-range cruise missiles from planes from the edge of Iranian airspace. They, by some reports, they used Azerbaijani airspace, which Iran is very upset about, obviously. And so this was the nature of the Israeli attack. And as far as the Iranian air defenses, it has also been reported that before the US attack, they basically were in touch with Iranian senior officials, explained that this was to be, as Trump described it, a one-and-done attack, not the beginning of a continuing war with Iran. and that Iran may have agreed, in fact, to turn off its air defense radars and allow the United States to conduct that attack. So, it's all an extraordinary sort of mix-up of misleading propaganda and various sort of covert operations and misdirection in terms of just sort of what Israel and the United States actually did. Now, the role of the IAEA in all this, I mean, and this is really what our article was about, was pretty fascinating. Was all coordinated down to the very day. At the end of May, Rafael Grossi, after the IAEA had confirmed some sort of traces of enriched uranium at those 3 sites in Iran, these it must be really clearly understood that these sites and these traces of uranium, no one is alleging that those involve some kind of current nuclear weapons development program. This all relates to the sort of murkier time before 2003, when the U.S. intelligence agencies still suspect that Iran may, in fact, have been conducting research towards developing nuclear weapons. The IAEA has previously concluded that any research it did during that time was very much about sort of developing some basic skills and technologies that might one day be useful for a nuclear weapons program. It's not that they had a full-blown program or anything close to actual nuclear weapons. But anyway, this is all still a bit murky. Although in 2015, when Iran signed the JCPOA nuclear agreement with the United States and other major powers, the IAEA signed off on that it was satisfied that it had resolved or resolved to its own satisfaction the various unanswered questions relating to Iran's activities before 2003. So anyway, coming up to the the present time, at the end of May, Grossi wrote this report to the IAEA Board of Governors, saying that yes, there are these traces of uranium there in Iran relating to its activities before 2003. And at the same time, in the same report, he reported that in the whole standoff between the U.S. and Iran and the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA and the lack of total cooperation between Iran and the IAEA, Iran had continued to develop, to enrich uranium up to 60%. This is not enough for weapons grade. You need 90% for weapons grade enriched uranium. But it had, between February and the end of May, it had actually increased its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium by about 50%. So it was producing a lot of 60% enriched uranium. If, in fact, that had been 90% uranium, or if it further enriched it up to 99%, 90%, that would be enough for several bombs. But of course, that's only one component of a bomb, the enriched uranium. You need all the other components to actually manufacture an actual nuclear weapon. And so I think the general expert opinion on that is that even with that enriched uranium, it would still take several years if, and this is the big question, if Iran actually made the decision to make nuclear weapons, which again, nobody has evidence that it has made that decision, and the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, has been perfectly clear about that he has no evidence of that. So Grossi submitted this report to the IAEA Board of Governors. And remember that there are two things in here. There's the traces of enriched uranium dating back to before 2003, and then there's the current enrichment of uranium up to 60%. So the Board of Governors met, and on June the 12th, they passed a resolution saying that because of the traces of enriched uranium and the refusal of Iran to provide any account for how they got there, and as we said in the article, the IAEA has not explained why they have ruled out the possibility. I mean, with the extensive Israeli undercover operations that it conducts in Iran and its extensive relationship with the MEK, couldn't they be the ones that scattered some traces of enriched uranium in these locations? I mean, so no one has really addressed that. But what
the report
the resolution that the IAEA considered and narrowly passed was essentially to do with Iran's non-cooperation with the IAEA's investigation of these three sites. It also mentioned in one whereas clause at the beginning the fact that Iran has been enriching uranium to 60%, and that its stockpile has increased substantially. And so now 2 days before the meeting, 2 days before this IAEA Board of Governors meeting, and this is reported by Israeli officials to CNN, the United States conducted quite an arm-twisting campaign to 8 of the countries represented on the IAEA Board of Governors. The Board of Governors has 35 members. These are sort of rotating positions. Any of the 180 members of the IAEA, can provide an ambassador in Vienna to sit on this Board of Governors. With 35 members, it needs 18 to pass a resolution. That in itself is a deviation from long-standing practice. For many, many years, the IAEA Board of Governors operated by consensus. So the fact that it's now, passing these resolutions by slim majorities is itself a weakness in its system, where that used to be very solid. If the IAEA Board of Governors passed a resolution, it was by consensus of 35 different member countries, but not anymore. So the US engaged in this arm twisting campaign with 8 countries whose votes it obviously considered as sitting on the fence.
Yeah.
And what it was asking them was either to vote for the resolution or to simply not vote. In the end, the resolution was passed with 19 votes, with 11 abstentions, a number not voting, and only 3 countries voting against. This is, of course, what the US was seeking to avoid. It didn't want a lot of countries voting against the resolution. So that left simply China, Russia, and Mali to vote against it. And 19 passed, so yes, the resolution did just pass, but that 11 abstentions, that's pretty unusual. That's 11 countries saying, we don't really know what's going on here or what this is all about. We're not, we're not gonna, we're not going to vote. Okay, we won't vote against it, but we're not voting for it. So the resolution did pass,
and that became the pretext for Israel to attack.
Well, yes. I mean, but I mean, again, it's important to be clear. This resolution pertained almost entirely. In fact, the meat of the resolution was about Iran's non-cooperation with the IAEA investigation into these 3 sites, and the extent of what the IAEA Board of Governors can do in response to that under the IAEA rules is basically they found Iran in non-cooperation, so non-compliance. So the consequence of that is that when the IAEA Board of Governors meets again in another 6 months, they would have the option, and again, they'd have to take another vote on this, to refer this matter to the UN Security Council. So that, under IAEA rules, is, the consequence of this resolution. However, obviously, and the Israeli officials who told CNN about this, they said that they saw the US arm twisting in support of the resolution as tacit approval and support for their war on Iran, for launching the war on Iran, and clearly, based on this, what the fact, the way these Israeli officials talk to CNN, I mean, it makes it clear that Israel really badly wanted this resolution to pass, and they essentially thanked the Americans for twisting arms to get it through, even though the resolution itself, absolutely does not in any way, shape, or form approve a military assault on Iran. However, within about something like 12 to 14 hours after this resolution passed on the morning of the 12th, Israel was launching warplanes to attack Iran. I mean, literally as the meeting was taking place and the resolution was being voted on, Israel was fueling planes, installing drop tanks on planes for the long flight to Iran, loading bombs or cruise missiles or drones or whatever on the Israeli planes. And this was all happening at the same time. And now the resolution itself, was not, it's not the role of the IAEA director to draft and introduce a resolution like this. This resolution was drafted and introduced by a group of Western US allies. I think it was, the UK, Germany, probably UK, Germany, France, the usual suspects. And
MI6 and CIA, essentially.
yeah, and Five Eyes and all that. But
Most.
but
so let me ask you.
So we have to realize that these are the most advanced countries in the world when it comes to military technology. And so it's not as if they and their satellites and their intelligence agencies didn't know that Israel was preparing for war as they sat there and sort of, innocently introduced this resolution and voted for it. So, I mean, there's a lot of complicity to go around in all of this. But the role of the IAEA, I think the main thing we were pointing to in our article is just to really stop and recognize the coordination between, the IAEA and Israel, a rogue country in terms of, the IAEA rules, and the United States, to launch absolutely unprovoked attack on a country that has probably cooperated more with the IAEA over the years than any other country on earth, with all these inspectors, sort of crawling in and out of, all its facilities for years and years and years, and so
Nicolas,
anyway.
Let me ask you a question, which I'm sure you can't answer, or you can't give a factual answer to, but I think it's worth asking. And that is, in your opinion, or is there any evidence that would show that Grossi himself was aware that of the probable consequences or the hidden consequences, that is, that Israel would use that report to justify an attack? Do you think, I mean, it's just a question of how you appreciate the man, I guess. Would he have been aware of that? Would he be aware?
Surely, I mean, yeah, and this is of course what Iran is now charging Grossi with, and has written to the Secretary General of the UN about, and to the President of the General Assembly, and that Grossi has never actually condemned the attack and spoken out clearly, to condemn it as an act of aggression, and
well, he should condemn it just on the basis of the fact that his report was used as the pretext.
But you see, I mean, the way these countries work, the way we know, the way the US and Israel and these Western countries work, they didn't come out and say, "Oh, this, we are conducting this attack, to enforce the resolution passed by the IAEA." No, they just said, "Oh, the IAEA passed this resolution condemning Iran, and but we are not going to allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons, and we are going to make absolutely sure that they don't, and the world cannot possibly live with an Iranian nuclear weapon." And so yeah, we're living in a dangerous, deceptive world. And I mean, this is why Mohammed and we compared Grossi to El-Baradei. El-Baradei was the IAEA director who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, precisely for standing up to Western lies and deception about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and non-existent nuclear program in Iran, and the world appreciated. They knew that he was right. The world knew that El-Baradei was right all along. Bush and Cheney were lying, and Powell were lying to the world about that, and they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. There's a real contrast here between the way El-Baradei conducted himself as the IAEA director and the way Grossi has. And so, after he retired, after his 10-year term expired, El-Baradei wrote a memoir, which is called The Age. What is it? The Age. Yes, The Age of Deception. And it's subtitled, I think it's Nuclear Treachery in a Dangerous World, or something. I probably got that slightly wrong, but he very much recognized
I remember
what he was dealing with in terms of all these Western allegations of against countries like Iraq and Iran.
Now, I remember a long time ago when you could have a prominent philosopher by the name of Bertrand Russell lead demonstrations in the street with masses of people against the very idea of having nuclear weapons. That was quite a long time ago, but everything you've been describing tells us that we're living in a very different world today. The Cold War was a dangerous time. So I'll ask you a final question just to close this, because we actually run over time. How dangerous is the world, and how much does this this war, tell us about how bad things might become in the very near future? On what sort of precipice are we standing?
Well, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has its doomsday clock set closer to midnight than ever before. And in its annual reports, each time it resets the hands of the clock, it is noted very explicitly that, this is a more dangerous time than the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, because beginning in the late 1950s, under Eisenhower, the two sides recognized the dangers, and they began negotiating arms control agreements, and starting with a partial nuclear test ban and leading to a complete test ban, and there was a whole architecture of agreements. And there was, a hotline between Moscow and Washington, so that the two presidents could keep in touch and, and sort of personally defuse any crisis. We have none of that now. We have gradually, sort of each time John Bolton has been appointed to a senior position in a Republican administration, he has notched on his gun belt another one of those Cold War treaties. An important, very important one was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, in which the two sides agreed not to build anti-ballistic missile systems. In other words, paradoxically, it left each of them free to attack each other, and created what's called, mutually assured destruction, and a sort of balance of terror between the two. But once the US withdrew from that, and it has also now withdrawn from the intermediate range nuclear missile treaty, and there are really very few. The remaining one is the New START which is still keeping their arsenals capped at a certain number. But that will expire.
In January 26. Yeah.
Yes, it
Right.
expires very soon, and so so that in itself makes it more dangerous. Now, we just had a war between India and Pakistan. We have Israel. Israel, if it's shown it's willing to use force illegally against Iran. Would it if Iran did respond with ballistic missile attacks on Israel that did a lot of damage. Israel will not say. It's censored. The information is censored on what damage it did to Israeli military headquarters and Israeli military bases, but it seems to have done a lot of pretty serious damage. And if Israel got in a full-scale war with Iran and was actually, losing its military edge, I do not for a minute think that they would not use nuclear weapons against Iran. Now, on the other side, Pakistan offered
yes, to Iran
to attack to use nuclear weapons against Israel to defend Iran.
But we're left speculating about a lot of things. Would Israel actually engage in a full-scale war with Iran if it wasn't certain that the U.S. would follow? And given that we have a certain Donald Trump in the White House, I think even the Israelis feel that they can't count on that.
Absolutely. Either Russia or the US could get drawn into something like that. But we actually have really, in many ways, an even more dangerous situation in Ukraine, where we have been edging for 3 years, closer and closer to outright war between the United States and Russia, or NATO and Russia.
NATO, that's my country in France. It's a big part of that.
Absolutely. Macron, brought up the question of sending more NATO troops into Ukraine, a little over a year ago. But Medea and I, as you said at the beginning, wrote a book, War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict. And we now have a new edition of that, which covers these 3 years of war and all the dangers of it. And that is now available for sale at the OR Books website. So that's orbooks.com. And on the 27th of July, it will be on sale at bookstores everywhere in the UK and the US and on Amazon. So I urge, even for people who read the original edition, I urge you to also read, especially the new chapters in our new revised second edition of War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict. And there is a whole chapter on the dangers of nuclear war.
Great. Okay, on that note, we'll close this interview. There are a lot of things, other things I wanted to talk about, but I think we've really focused on probably what's perceived as the most dangerous thing that has happened in recent months. And we know that there are probably going to be other dangerous moments coming. So maybe we'll come back to the conversation later, Nicolas. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah.
Okay, great talking to you, and have a good summer anyway.
Yes, you too. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.